without delay and without conditions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Mr. Pedersen and Ms. Wassomu for their briefings. I would like to talk about 3 points. The situation in Gaza at the moment risks a regional conflagration, but the spillover that would plunge the region into a war with incalculable consequences for all people is not inevitable. All members of this council must step up their diplomatic efforts to avoid this catastrophic scenario. France is standing here. The recent clashes in Syria with the mobilization of armed groups at the border with Israel run the risk of a spillover of the conflict into Syria. The opening of a new front against Israel in Syria would further destabilize the country, and the Syrian population would once again be the primary victims. The war in Gaza should not lead us to ignore ongoing violence in Syria and against Syrians. The regime's bombardments in the Idlib region are unjustifiable. These bombings have killed dozens of civilians, including children. They've damaged numerous civilian infrastructure buildings, without counting those who are already forced to move. As the Special Envoy has stated, a cessation of hostilities throughout the whole of Syria is necessary in line with this Council's resolutions. This aim must go hand in hand with a credible and inclusive political process in line with Resolution 2254. Regional tension should not let us lose sight of this. I'd like to reiterate my country's support for Mr. Pedersen's mediation efforts and also for the Constitutional Committee. The conditions for a voluntary, sure and safe and dignified return of refugees to their country must be met. Damas must always present specific, verifiable commitments here. Acts must be followed. Must follow words. Words must be followed by actions. France will continue to provide support to all these people. So the resumption of the provision of humanitarian aid in the northwest of Syria is a good news that's come to us. Assistance that comes to this part of Syria is nonetheless insufficient. So this is a source of major concern, in particular with the onset of winter. 5.7 million people need humanitarian assistance. We need to help humanitarian stakeholders meet these needs. There's also a need for the Syrian regime to renew unconditionally in November its authorization for the 2 crossing points of Bab al-Shala and al-Rai. Humanitarian access must be safe and unhindered. The Council needs to remain seized with this issue. The Secretariat needs to give account in writing to the Council of the humanitarian response in Syria. Thank you.
I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
السيد الرئيس أود في البداية
Mr. President, I would like first to thank Mr. Geir Petersen and Ms. Edem Wassomu for their valuable briefings today. Our meeting today comes as our region is going through one of the most difficult crises in its modern history. We are witnessing another devastating war where civilians are suffering terribly in Gaza. Concerns are mounting with every passing day without ending this war about the possibility of the entire region sliding into a regional war, the damage of which would be tremendous for everyone. The growing tensions in the occupied Syrian Golan and other neighboring areas where over the past weeks confirm the urgent need to address the various crises in our region, including the Syrian crisis. Syria, still suffering from the repercussions of a more than 13-year war, cannot afford to become another front for settling geopolitical goals. The Syrian crisis is one of the most complex files due to foreign interference. Any new escalation would impede our ultimate goal of achieving peace and security in Syria and the entire region. Mr. President, the UAE supports the efforts of the Special Envoy and the Arab Contact Group to convene meetings of the Constitutional Committee at the end of this year. This would strengthen the dialogue between the Syrian parties to end the crisis under a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned process and without foreign interference. We stress that a political solution is the only way to resolve this crisis. Considering the recent increase in tensions and hostilities in Syria, the UAE stresses the importance of de-escalation, ensuring a ceasefire in all Syrian regions, and to refrain from targeting vital facilities, especially Aleppo Airport and Damascus Airport, to avoid hindering the delivery of humanitarian aid. The United Arab Emirates also stresses the importance of combating terrorist threats in Syria, especially as Daesh continues to launch attacks to destabilize security and stability in Syria. The UAE reiterates its strong condemnation of the terrorist attack that targeted the military academy in Homs in central Syria. The UAE denounces these criminal acts and firmly rejects all forms of violence and terrorism. We also express our sincere condolences and sympathies to the government of the Syrian Arab Republic, its people, and to the families of the victims who were killed in this heinous crime, and wish for a speedy recovery for all those injured. It is unfortunate that there was no clear condemnation by the Security Council of this terrorist attack. Mr. President, each year the economic situation has continued to deteriorate due to multiple factors. This includes the rise in prices of fuel, commodities, and food, as well as the decline of the Syrian pound to unprecedented levels. This situation demands that the international community explore ways to boost the Syrian economy, which in turn would improve the humanitarian and living conditions of the Syrian people. We also stress the importance of restoring water and electricity networks, which are essential for providing humanitarian services. In this regard, we express our appreciation at the continued efforts of OCHA and the Syrian government to seamlessly deliver humanitarian aid through the 3 crossings at the Syrian-Turkish border. As we approach the deadline of the extension next month, we hope that the opening of the Bab el-Salama and Bab el-Rai crossings will be further extended. This is necessary to ensure that the needs of the Syrian people are met, especially with the approaching winter season and the scarcity of basic resources and livelihoods. We reiterate the need to use all modalities to deliver aid, including by ensuring cross-line delivery of convoys. We urge to increase the number of these convoys in line with the humanitarian needs on the ground. In conclusion, Mr. President, the present turning point in our region requires intensifying efforts to prevent the escalation of tensions. This includes preventing Syria from sliding into a regional war and working simultaneously to make progress towards finding peaceful solutions for all crises in the region. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Brazil. Colleagues, Brazil fully associates itself with the speech of the Swiss delegation in our capacity as of co-pin holders of the Syrian humanitarian file. I now speak in my national capacity on the political aspects of the Syrian conflict. I thank Mr. Geir Pedersen and Ms. Fosorno for their comprehensive briefings and commend their work. I welcome the delegations of Iran, Syria, and Turkey to this meeting. We, the members of the Security Council, hold this meeting at a moment of dangerous escalation of violence in Syria and in the region. Indeed, the recent developments in Syria are cause for grave concern. On October 5th, we learned with distress of the terrorist attack against the graduation ceremony at the Military Academy of Homs, which left more than 100 dead, including civilians, among which many children. Brazil expresses its condolences to the relatives and friends of the victims and reiterates its firm repudiation of any acts of terrorism and attacks to the civilian population. The situation in northern Syria has deteriorated even more. In the country's northwest, there have been reports of airstrikes in Idlib with civilian casualties and great damage to civilian infrastructure, as well as attacks by the Security Council-listed terrorist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. In the northeast, there have been worrisome reports of violence, which included strikes affecting civilian infrastructure. Since the beginning of hostilities between Israel and Hamas, Syria has been affected by the conflict on more than one occasion. Strikes on Aleppo and Damascus airports have disrupted United Nations humanitarian air service flights more than once. Some days ago, strikes on facilities in eastern Syria were reported. Sadly, as these events point out, the situation in Syria remains very much volatile, with dire consequences for the civilian population. The risk of a regional spillover of the Israel-Hamas conflict is real and a ground for deep concern. In this context of growing instability, we renew our appeal to all sides to exercise maximum restraint. We recall that Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected in accordance with international law and this Council's relevant resolutions. We also recall that all sides must comply with their obligations under international law and ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We have repeatedly stated that there is no military solution to the Syrian conflict. In light of the unfolding humanitarian crisis and the deteriorating security conditions in Syria, an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire is urgently needed. The Syrian people cannot afford further losses and additional damage to critical infrastructure. At the same time, renewed political will is essential to resume a credible intra-Syrian political process, especially with the reconvening of the Constitutional Committee. In this spirit, we encourage all parties to work towards the resumption of the UN-facilitated political process. We concur with the Special Envoy that the status quo in Syria is unsustainable and that without a meaningful political path to implement Council Resolution 2254, we risk further deterioration of the situation in the country. It would have detrimental effects for the region, especially in the current volatile context. Diplomacy and true political will must be given a true chance. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Syria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. The world's eyes are fixed at the Israeli aggression in our region today. The aggression continues, where the occupying forces have committed dozens of massacres and brutal attacks and crimes in Gaza. Israel continues to launch the flaming fire in the region. And in only 10 days, there have been 4 attacks against 2 civilian airports in Syria, which has halted the operation of the 2 airports and have also led to hindering the humanitarian operations of the United Nations. The Syrian Arab Republic, while it warns once again against the continued aggression, and while we call on the Security Council to end its silence and to uphold its responsibility and condemn these attacks and hold their perpetrators accountable. Syria also considers that the protection and the guaranteed immunity provided to Israel by the United States of America and some other states makes them partners in the responsibility for the serious violations of international law and the UN Charter. Mr. President, in parallel with these Israeli attacks, the terrorists continue their crimes against the Syrian people. On the 5th of October, through support of known states led by the United States of America, have committed one of their most brutal and bloodiest crimes when drones targeted a graduation ceremony of the military academy in Homs, which led to dozens of victims and hundreds injured, and their families who are civilians who are attending the ceremony, including women and children. The Syrian Arab Republic affirms that this act will not dissuade our efforts to eliminate terrorism from our territory. In this same context, the United States of America continues its blatant violations against the Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity through its illegal military presence on Syrian territory and its support for separatist militia in the northeast. These militia have recently shelled two water plants in Deir ez-Zor using drones, leading to their halted operation and depriving tens of thousands of Syrians of drinking water. In addition, the U.S. sends its agents to illegally cross into Syrian territory. And there was previously an assistant a secretary of defense who came to Syria, which proves the destructive role of the U.S. in Syria and which prolongs the crisis and the suffering. The U.S. and the European Union continue their unilateral, coercive, illegal, inhuman measures, depriving the Syrians of their most basic human rights, such as the right to food, health, education, development, leading to economic and humanitarian suffering that is unprecedented and that is further exacerbated boldly by the U.S. Through the looting of national wealth, including wheat, gas, and oil. Mr. President, within our Syrian efforts to improve the humanitarian situation, we continue to promote our cooperation with the UN and its agencies and programs, including through issuing the necessary permits to carry out their operations throughout Syria. In this context, through a sovereign decree, we have approved the use of 3 border crossings and 2 cross lines within our territory to deliver the necessary assistance to Syrian civilians. However, the entry of assistance through Bab al-Hawa crossing was delayed for longer than 2 months, and only 1 convoy has entered cross-line into the areas requiring the assistance, which reveals the real parties preventing the delivery of humanitarian aid. Therefore, we emphasize the need to bring pressure to bear on the terrorists in Syria in order for the assistance to reach the needed persons. Mr. President, the UN efforts face a serious challenge. The lack of funding is the largest obstacle preventing the operation. The humanitarian response plan has only been funded by 29.3%. It is as though someone is deliberately prolonging the critical humanitarian situation in Syria, in particular after the earthquake of last February. This is a time when Syrians need long-term solutions and need to rely less on assistance. Mr. President, Syria reiterates once again that we welcome the return of every refugee who was forced to leave the country because of terrorism and because of the negative impact of the coercive measures. In this context, Syria continues every effort to facilitate the return of refugees and continues to cooperate with the UNHCR, including through the promotion of the communication channels with the UNHCR in order to address all concerns related to refugees. We also emphasize that the dignified and voluntary return requires conditions to allow for the return, including the lifting of the unilateral coercive measures and quick impact projects, as well as the removal of mines. As for the humanitarian situation in Al-Rukban camp, it is the responsibility of the illegal U.S. military presence, and it can be addressed through the removal and closure of this camp. The same situation applies to Al Hol camp, which is controlled by separatist militias. This camp must also be discontinued. Syria condemns all these American practices, including its support for terrorist groups, separatist militias, and its efforts to maintain the status quo. At the expanded consequences of the Syrian crisis require sincere political will from Security Council members in order to end the repeated Israeli attacks and end the illegal foreign presence on Syrian territory, and to immediately and unconditionally remove the coercive measures and to support the Syrian state and its institutions in order to improve the humanitarian situation without discrimination. In addition, donors must uphold their pledges, and we must increase the early recovery projects. Mr. President, allow me, before concluding, to mention the U.S. statement. We have heard allegations of the right to self-defense. The ambassador said their forces in Syrian territory. She has forgotten that these forces are illegally present in Syrian territory. It appears that the United States of America afford themselves the right for their forces to exist anywhere at any time without any approval or consent and in full violation of the law. It has used as a justification the war on Daesh, which is American-made. I would like to remind the U.S. ambassador of its country's history that is full of black episodes, especially in the Middle East, through the destruction of Iraq based on lies, and lately the full support and unconditional support for Israel. It has not sufficed in the previous days to impede the work of the Security Council to protect the Palestinian people. However, they have supported the Israeli war machine through its carriers and military aid, in addition to financial aid in the amount of billions of dollars. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Mr. President, I thank Mr. Peterson, the special envoy, and Ms. Osorno for the update and informative briefings. Regrettably, after 12 years of the Syrian crisis, terrorism remains a significant and persistent threat to Syria and broader region, with its core activities concentrated in regions outside the control of the Syrian government. We are concerned about the terrorist activities in the areas under occupation. The illegal presence of US military forces in Syria is the primary source of insecurity in the country and has provided fertile ground for the nourishment of terrorist organizations, both within the country and the broader region. Syrian Arab Republic has officially and consistently raised objections to these violations and has called upon the Security Council to halt these aggressions and put an end to the US occupation. The fight against terrorism must be carried out in full respect of Syria's national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence, and without using it as a pretext to violate these fundamental principles of international law. Mr. President, Iran strongly condemns reprehensible terrorist attacks perpetrated by the terrorist organization targeting the graduation ceremony for the cadet of the military academy in the city of Homs on 4th October. This cowardly act of terrorism has tragically resulted in numerous loss of life and injured, including civilians, military personnel, and their innocent family members. It is deeply regrettable that the Security Council continued to exhibit political double standards and refuse to condemn such heinous and horrifying crimes. Further, Iran condemns in the strongest terms the continuous act of terrorism carried out by the Israeli regime within Syrian territory, deliberately targeting innocent civilians and vital infrastructure. The most recent attack was conducted in Idlib last night. These acts of aggression are a serious threat to the regional peace and security, while concurrently committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza Strip. The Israeli regime conducted aggressive operations aimed at the civilian airport in Damascus and Aleppo. These terrorist attacks inflicted severe damage to the essential airport facilities, causing significant disrupting to their operations and for considerable duration. Tragically, these assaults also led to loss of lives and injured among several innocent civilians. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Syria remains deeply concerning. Currently, one of the most urgent issues facing the country is severe economic hardship, significantly worsened by the so-called Caesar sanctions. These sanctions have placed a disproportionate burden on the Syrian people, particularly women and children. These illegal measures have sadly transformed into instruments that terrorize nations and erode the bedrock of international law. We are also concerned about the current level of funding for the Syrian humanitarian response. The current level of funding allocated for the Syrian humanitarian response falls far below that needed. The severe shortage of funding severely hinders the UN ability to provide adequate assistance to those in need. As much, the provision of impartial and non-politicized humanitarian assistance to all regions of Syria is crucial for saving lives. We stress the humanitarian assistance and reconstruction initiative in Syria should not be wielded as tools to exert pressure on the Syrian government. Mr. President, on political track, we hold a steadfast belief that the essential solution to the Syrian crisis should be pursued through diplomatic and political means, as a military solution has the potential to exacerbate an already complex situation. We highlight the significance of resuming the meeting of the Constitutional Committee as an effective mechanism for advancing the political process. The continued functioning of this committee is vital, with its venue being of lesser importance. The role of the United Nations should remain supportive, with the entire process being under Syrian leadership and ownership. We support the return of Syrian refugees to their homeland. At present, there exists a significant number of the Syrian refugees in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and their return should be facilitated through the cooperative efforts of all those host countries. Addressing the numerous challenges confronting Syrian refugees require the certain of critical infrastructure. The United Nations, especially the High Commissioner for Refugees, plays a pivotal role in this endeavor. I wish to emphasize the importance of respecting the territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and independence of Syrian Arab Republic. Iran reaffirmed its steadfast commitment to fight against terrorism. To conclude, Mr. President, in response to the unfounded allegation raised against my country by representatives of the United States during this meeting, we are obliged to emphatically refute these unsubstantiated claims. They have no basis and are completely without merit. The U.S. attempts to shift the blame from the culprit to the victims and put finger on Iran. Iran has consistently upheld its commitment to promoting peace and security in the region. Iran's presence in Syria is fully legal and in response to an official request from the Syrian government to combat terrorism. The effectiveness of Iran's anti-terrorism efforts, particularly against terrorist groups like Daesh, is evident to all. In stark contrast, the unlawful presence of the United States in Syria, purportedly for counterterrorism purposes, but with support for terrorist organizations, flagrantly violate the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. This destabilizing presence has had advanced repercussions for both Syria and entire region. The Syrian Arab Republic has officially and consistently raised objection to these violations and has called upon the Security Council to halt this aggression and put an end to the U.S. occupation. The United States must rectify its transgressions of international law and UN Charter by discontinuing its support for terrorist groups and withdraw from the northeastern region of Syria. Mr. President, it is indeed that the U.S. is seeking to increase escalation, but overtly aligning itself with the aggressor at the expense of the innocent Palestinian people. The United States and some Western countries attempt to equate the self-defense and right of self-determination of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance with terrorism, attempting to grant the occupying regime Israel an unjust right to self-defense. The United States' unwavering support for occupation and aggression has rendered it a part of problem and the challenge the international community in facing in the current situation in Gaza Strip. Let me be clear, Mr. President, Iran's primary objective is to avoid any escalation in the region. That is why Iran has aligned with the international community to endorse the call for an immediate end to Israeli relentless military aggression, establishing a ceasefire, and providing unhindered access to humanitarian aid to the people in need in Gaza Strip. However, should it confront any threat, attack, or aggression endangering its security, national interests, or its people, Iran will not hesitate to use its inherent right under international law and the UN Charter to respond decisively. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. International community's continued attention to the humanitarian situation in Syria is crucial. The conditions remain especially dire in the northwest, where 4.1 million people need critical life-saving humanitarian assistance. Increasing number of attacks by the regime in Greater Idlib area disrupt essential services. Therefore, the safe and uninterrupted continuation of the UN cross-border humanitarian assistance, as long as needed, is a humanitarian imperative. The non-extension of the Council mandate last July led to significant uncertainty and risks to this critical operation. Aid shipments had to stop for more than 2 months. And this disruption occurred just a few months after the earthquakes, which caused further destruction in the region. Going forward, the Syrian regime and the members of the Security Council have important responsibilities to eliminate the risks. In this context, we expect the continued use of Bab al-Hawa, Bab al-Salam, and Al-Rai border crossings for UN aid deliveries beyond mid-November and January 2024 time limits. This is especially critical given the approaching winter months when typically the humanitarian needs are at their highest. The international community, especially the UN Security Council, should closely follow the course of this operation and stand ready to step in if needed. The continued monitoring and reporting of cross-border aid deliveries by the UN in line with existing modalities are also critical to ensure the transparency and oversight of this massive operation. As with all large-scale humanitarian operations, humanitarian funding is another fundamental requirement for effective cross-border assistance to Syria. The UN Syria Humanitarian Response Plan is funded less than 30%, which is a source of concern. We reiterate our call for sufficient and sustained funding so that the United Nations can continue to carry out its humanitarian operations for millions of Syrians in need. Mr. President, the developments in the Middle East since the 7th of October have painfully reminded once again that the recurrent cycles of crisis, hostilities, and violence are inevitable if political solutions are not developed to address the root causes of conflicts. This reality should always be kept in mind when dealing with the Syrian crisis as well. The fact is that the root causes of the Syrian conflict are political. Syrian people have legitimate aspirations still unmet after 12 years of conflict. In the absence of national reconciliation, Syria will continue to suffer from the repercussions of an ongoing conflict. Current escalation in Israeli-Palestinian conflict brings new risks for the wider region, and Syria is not immune to those risks. Special attention is required in the current critical juncture so that the spiral of violence does not drag Syria into further instability. The formula for ending the Syrian conflict is clear. The international community must ensure simultaneous progress in the following 3 tracks. The revitalization of the political process in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. Creating the conditions for safe, voluntary, and dignified return of Syrian refugees, and disrupting the malign and separatist agenda of the terrorist organizations in order to preserve Syria's territorial integrity and unity. Mr. President, we have international consensus on the significance of implementing the Security Council Resolution 2254. For this, we have to work together to reactivate the Constitutional Committee as soon as possible. The Constitutional Committee is the only platform that brings the Syrian opposition and the regime together under the UN facilitation. The opposition is a building block in the political process, without which there can be no national reconciliation. Therefore, the opposition should not be sidelined. We remain in close contact with Special Envoy Pedersen in his efforts to create momentum in the political track. Mr. President, currently, the biggest threat to territorial integrity of Syria, as well as to the prospects of a united and peaceful future for this country, is the terrorist organizations operating on its soil. Through its activities inside Syria, PKK-PYD and its offshoot, the so-called SDF, constitute the textbook example of a separatist terrorist organization. It kills and maims civilians, oppresses and terrorizes local populations, abducts and recruits children. PKK bans school curricula, closes Arabic teaching schools, arrests teachers, and releases Daesh members in exchange for bribes. Turkey shares 911 kilometers of land border with Syria. The presence of PKK-PYD terrorist organization in this country, just beyond our borders,
poses a vital threat to our national security. This terrorist organization has been using the refuge and the support it receives in Syria for attacking Turkey. The terrorists who perpetrated the attack in front of the Ministry of Interior in Ankara on the 1st of October were trained in Syria and they entered Turkey from Syria. PKK-YPG also continues to launch terrorist attacks from Tel Rifat and Manbij region. Turkey conducts counter-terrorism operations against PKK-PYD terrorism, an exercise of its inherent right to self-defense in line with the Article 51 of the UN Charter and relevant UN Security Council resolutions. These operations exclusively target terrorists and terrorist capabilities, which are directly linked with the functioning and financing of the terrorist organization. We are determined not to allow PKK terrorist organization find safe haven along our borders. I thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of Turkey for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to speak in French first, and after you can rise and put your questions in any language you want. Le Royaume du Maroc se félicite de l'adoption de la résolution 703 du Conseil de sécurité sur la question du Sahara marocain. À cette occasion, je voudrais remercier vivement le pen holder américain pour la rédaction et la négociation de cette résolution. Nos remerciements s'adressent également aux autres membres du Conseil pour leur apport constructif et leur vote en faveur de cette résolution, qui représente un jalon additionnel dans le socle onusien pour le règlement définitif de ce différend régional entre deux pays voisins, le Maroc et l'Algérie. La nouvelle résolution du Conseil de sécurité consacre la sagesse et la clairvoyance du Conseil de sécurité en tant que garant de la paix et la sécurité dans le monde pour mettre fin à ce problème résiduel de la guerre froide. En ce faisant, le Conseil de sécurité s'est basé non seulement sur le droit et la légalité internationale, mais également sur le réalisme, le pragmatisme, le compromis. Cette résolution conforte également la vision et le choix stratégique de Sa Majesté le Roi en faveur de la négociation, le règlement pacifique des différends, la politique de la main tendue, et ce, conformément à l'article 6 de la Charte des Nations Unies et des résolutions pertinentes du Conseil de sécurité. La nouvelle résolution du Conseil de sécurité consacre les, socles, les 7 fondamentaux pour la résolution de ce problème. 1. La résolution réaffirme la prééminence, la préscience de l'initiative marocaine d'autonomie en tant que seule et unique solution sérieuse et crédible pour régler ce problème. En ce faisant, là également, le Conseil a rejoint non seulement le Maroc, mais également la centaine de pays à travers le monde qui soutiennent cette initiative dans le plein respect de la souveraineté nationale et de l'intégrité territoriale. 2. Le Conseil réaffirme les paramètres de la solution qui doit être politique, réaliste, pragmatique, durable et basée sur le compromis. Non déplaise à l'Algérie et à son proxy, le Polisario, cette résolution signe le 28e acte de décès du référendum, qui est mort et définitivement enterré depuis 2 décennies. 3. La résolution réaffirme également la responsabilité première de l'Algérie en tant que partie prenante principale à ce différend, en la nommant à 5 reprises dans le corps de la résolution et en lui demandant de présenter et de développer sa position afin de faire progresser le processus politique. 4. Le Conseil consacre le cadre des tables rondes du processus politique avec ses 4 participants, ignorant par là même le refus de l'Algérie de reprendre sa place autour de la table ronde. 5. Le Conseil exprime ses vives préoccupations à l'égard de la rupture du cessez-le-feu par le groupe séparatiste armé et le somme de respecter la libre circulation et réapprovisionnement de la MINURSO. 6. La résolution se félicite des réalisations du Royaume dans le domaine de la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme, désavouant ainsi les allégations fallacieuses de l'Algérie et de son proxy polisarien. Enfin, 7. Le Conseil appelle dans sa 13e résolution consécutive à l'enregistrement des populations séquestrés des camps de Tindouf et demande aux organisations humanitaires internationales de suivre les pratiques onusiennes lors de l'acheminement et la délivrance de l'assistance alimentaire afin d'en prévenir le détournement par le groupe séparatiste armé le Polisario et les responsables algériens, comme cela a été confirmé dans le dernier rapport du PAM qui a été publié en janvier de 2023. Voilà, je suis à votre disposition pour toute question que vous voudrez poser. Adla, s'il vous plaît.
La presse a parlé hier de 4 explosions dans la ville de Sahara. Est-ce que vous aurez plus d'informations sur les responsables?
Effectivement, comme l'a souligné la presse internationale, les radios, il y a eu 4 déflagrations dans la nuit de samedi à dimanche dans la ville spirituelle du Sahara marocain, dans la ville de Ma'laïnin, le grand leader de l'opposition et surtout combattant, qui a combattu la colonisation espagnole. C'est en pleine nuit que ces 4 explosions ont eu lieu. Je vais vous montrer ici. C'est une ville qui est connue pour sa sérénité, pour la qualité de sa vie et surtout pour le pacifisme de ses populations civiles. Les 4 explosions dont vous avez fait mention, madame, elles sont pratiquement dans le même périmètre. Première explosion, c'est dans le quartier industriel. Deuxième explosion, c'est dans le Hay Salam. Troisième, Hay Salam. Et le 4e, Hay El-Wahda. Vous voyez, c'est pratiquement la ville et sa périphérie. Il n'y a aucune installation civile, comme vous pouvez le constater dans la première explosion dans le quartier industriel. Il n'y a aucune installation ou site militaire ni quoi que ce soit. Deuxième, Hay Salam également, vous voyez des bâtiments, vous voyez des rues, vous voyez des terrains vagues. Troisièmement, Hay Salam, vous voyez, c'est les constructions, pratiquement. Et Hay Nahda également, vous voyez des bâtiments, des rues. Ben, c'est dans ces quartiers que ces explosions ont eu lieu. Nous déplorons malheureusement un martyr, un jeune garçon de 23 ans qui s'appelle Hamza, qui est venu, qui ne vit même pas là-bas, qui est venu voir sa tante pour demander la main de sa cousine. Il vit en France, dans la ville de Tarbes. Il est venu avec sa mère pour construire un avenir avec la femme de son cœur ou la fille de son cœur. Malheureusement, le destin on a décidé autrement, ou je dirais ceux qui ont organisé, perpétré ces explosions lâches, ignobles, on a décidé autrement. Nous déplorons également 3 blessés, dont 2 dans un état grave et qui se trouvent encore aux urgences à l'hôpital militaire de Laayoune. Immédiatement après ces explosions, qui ont eu lieu pratiquement vers minuit, minuit 30, la MINURSO a été avisée. Et comme vous le savez, la MINURSO a également des postes d'observation à Smara. Ils sont venus immédiatement. Ils ont constaté que les explosions ont eu lieu dans des quartiers civils, des maisons civiles, un mort et des blessés civils. Et bien sûr, ils vont faire leur rapport au quartier, ici le headquarter, au secrétariat de l'ONU. Et bien sûr, le Conseil de sécurité sera saisi par ce rapport. Les autorités marocaines, de leur côté, ils ont demandé à ce qu'il y ait, à travers le procureur général, auprès de la cour d'appel de Laayoune, qui a demandé à ce qu'on diligente, la police judiciaire de diligenter une enquête afin de vérifier ou d'identifier les détails scientifiques, mais également balistiques de ces explosions. Le Maroc est un pays légaliste. Pour le moment, nous sommes dans la phase de l'enquête, de la collecte d'informations. Nous n'accusons personne parce que tout simplement, nous attendons les résultats probants de cette enquête. À ce moment-là, nous agirons. Mais nous ne pouvons pas ignorer qu'il y a un faisceau d'indices qui sont là également probants. Les faisceaux d'indices, il n'y a pas un, il n'y a pas deux, il n'y a pas trois, il y en a plusieurs, et qui versent pratiquement vers la même direction qui s'est prononcée elle-même. Le premier indice, c'est le communiqué qui a été publié par le groupe séparatiste armé, le Polisario. C'est le communiqué 901, où il est dit que, là j'ai le communiqué en français, où il est dit que c'est ce qu'ils appellent l'armée de libération sahraoui a ciblé 3 régions. Le Mehbes, Smara, Farsia. Smara, il parle de l'explosion et de projectiles qu'ils ont lancés dans la nuit de samedi à dimanche. Premier indice. Et là, c'est un communiqué officiel du Polisario. Deuxième indice, lorsque les radios et les télévisions du monde, les agences de presse ont commencé à parler de ces explosions, le Polisario, et en le citant, à aucun moment, il n'a démenti. En l'absence de démenti de sa part, tout le responsabilise et tout indique que, effectivement, son silence confirme que c'est eux qui sont derrière ces explosions. Comment pourrions-nous qualifier tout en attendant les résultats et les conclusions de l'enquête de la police judiciaire de la Younes Mara? Nous savons que le droit international, le droit humanitaire international, les résolutions des conseils de sécurité qualifient toute attaque ou tout ciblage des civils ou des villes civiles comme acte terroriste, comme acte de guerre. Et bien sûr, ça suppose des conséquences et des responsabilités. Pour le moment, tout ce que nous pouvons dire, c'est que ces attaques ou ces explosions, cette victime innocente, que j'appellerai Shahid, qui a attristé tout le Maroc, ne resteront pas impunis. Les responsables devront assumer leurs responsabilités juridiques, mais également politiques. Pas seulement ceux qui ont perpétré ces attaques, mais ceux également qui sont derrière eux, ceux qui les abritent, ceux qui leur fournissent les missiles ou les katyushas ou les mortiers. Parce que tout simplement, quand il y a une déflagration, ça laisse des traces. Ça laisse parfois des indices techniques de l'origine qui va permettre au Maroc la traçabilité de l'explosif et la traçabilité du missile, du katyusha ou du mortier. À ce moment-là, le Maroc prendra les décisions qui s'imposeront et tirera les conséquences et les conclusions qui s'imposent. Et bien sûr, le premier à en tirer devra être le Conseil de sécurité, dès lors qu'il aura un rapport détaillé de la part de la MINURSO. La MINURSO est là pour superviser le cessez-le-feu. Le cessez-le-feu a été rompu il y a maintenant 2 ans, quelques mois. Il y a une responsabilité et nous attendons à ce que ce rapport soit rendu public par les Nations Unies afin que tout le monde sache qui cible les civils, qui tue les innocents, qui déstabilise la sécurité dans la région et qui risque de provoquer des drames sur l'ensemble d'un embrasement de la région. Tout le monde doit savoir ça et la communauté internationale, bien sûr, doit juger de ce qui s'est passé. Nous faisons confiance à la MINURSO, nous faisons confiance au Conseil de sécurité pour décider et, bien sûr, le Maroc tirera, comme je l'ai dit, la responsabilité qui s'impose après cet acte que je qualifierais d'ignoble et d'acte terroriste, condamnable. Deuxième question, oui.
Pourquoi vous insistez de négocier qu'avec les Algériens?
C'est pas que nous insistons, c'est pas nous qui insistons pour négocier avec les Algériens, parce que nous sommes dans notre Sahara. Et l'Algérie assume une responsabilité. Elle assume une responsabilité historique, politique et juridique. Historique, parce que l'Algérie qui a créé le Polisario, c'est l'Algérie qui l'héberge, c'est l'Algérie qui l'arme, c'est l'Algérie qui le finance. Et c'est l'Algérie qui lui a permis d'autoproclamer sa chimérique république. Et c'est du territoire algérien que viennent les pick-up et les voitures lourdes avec des canons de toutes sortes. Donc il y a une responsabilité politique, historique. La responsabilité juridique, c'est les actes qui sont perpétrés. Au Sahara marocain, il n'y a pas que le Polisario qu'on est responsable. Le droit international est très clair. Tous ceux qui aident un groupe armé devront en assumer la responsabilité, surtout que l'Algérie, dans le seul camp de réfugiés dans le monde où l'autorité, la souveraineté pratiquement est confiée à notre entité, autre que l'entité algérienne. Politique. Politique, on se rappelle que l'accord de Madrid a été signé le 15 novembre 1975. Imaginez-vous que 4 jours après, le ministre des Affaires étrangères algérien est venu voir le secrétaire général pour lui dire qu'il rejette l'accord. De quel droit il le rejette? Au moment où les deux ministres, mauritaniens et marocains, sont venus voir le secrétaire général pour lui remettre copie du rapport. Le lendemain, et là c'est documenté dans le rapport du secrétaire général, l'Algérie envoie une note à la mission permanente pour dire que, voilà, suite à cet accord, les parties concernées et intéressées, les deux termes, concernés et intéressés, sont l'Espagne, pas le Maroc et la Mauritanie, non, l'Espagne, l'Algérie, et c'est après que vient le Maroc et la Mauritanie. Vous voyez? Donc, c'est pour toutes ces raisons politiques, juridiques et historiques que nous demandons à ce que l'Algérie soit autour de la table ronde pour régler et discuter du problème. Et je tiens à le dire, nous n'allons pas discuter de la marocanité du Sahara avec l'Algérie, ni avec son proxy polisarien. Nous allons discuter de la stabilité dans la région. Nous allons discuter de l'intégration économique. Nous allons discuter de comment on peut ouvrir les frontières et régler ce problème entre les deux pays pour que enfin la paix et la stabilité reviennent et surtout l'espoir aux populations de la région. Voilà pourquoi nous insistons. En plus, il ne faut pas oublier les résolutions du Conseil de sécurité. L'Algérie est citée chaque fois avec le Maroc. 5 fois dans la résolution qui vient d'être adoptée, la 2703. 5 fois l'Algérie est citée, 5 fois le Maroc est cité. Donc, ce n'est pas seulement le Maroc qui demande, mais il a une responsabilité et devra l'assumer. Malheureusement, l'Algérie assume la responsabilité uniquement dans dans les déclarations à l'Assemblée générale parce qu'il sait qu'il n'y a pas de conséquences là-bas. J'aurais souhaité que vous me posiez la question, que veut l'Algérie? L'Algérie veut tout simplement l'absolution de sa responsabilité. Et c'est pour ça qu'il se dérobe. C'est pour ça qu'il ne veut pas revenir à la table ronde. C'est pour ça qu'il s'accroche à son soi-disant statut de observateur ou de juste intéressé. Donc l'Algérie n'aura jamais cette absolution. Il aura toujours à rendre des comptes devant l'histoire, devant les peuples du Maghreb et devant les Nations Unies pour tout ce qui est arrivé dans notre région comme gâchis, malheureusement. Merci, madame. S'il vous plaît.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, bonjour. Salim Abnabou pour 2M.
Ouais.
Permettez-moi d'insister sur l'Algérie. Pourquoi est-ce que, selon vous, l'Algérie persiste dans son refus de permettre le recensement des populations des camps de Tindouf, malgré les demandes répétitives du Conseil de sécurité?
La raison est simple, c'est parce qu'ils ont quelque chose à cacher. Et ce qu'ils ont à cacher, c'est le chiffre. Et le chiffre, c'est pas pendant plus de pratiquement 25 ans, ils ont avancé le même chiffre, 175 000. Maintenant, heureusement, les agences onusiennes ont déclaré depuis 2005 que ce chiffre est exagéré. Ils ont descendu à 90 000. Comme si il n'y a ni mort, ni naissance, ni départ de ces camps. Ils ne veulent pas de recensement parce que tout simplement, il n'y a pas que les Sahraouis. Il y a des Maliens, il y a des Sénégalais, il y a des Algériens, il y a des Touaregs. Et forcément, eux, ils lient l'enregistrement à la solution politique. Aucun texte du Haut Commissariat ne lie l'enregistrement des populations d'un camp de réfugiés au règlement politique. L'enregistrement est un droit statutaire ou une obligation statutaire du pays hôte en coopération avec le Haut Commissariat aux réfugiés. Et le recensement, normalement, ne doit avoir aucune dimension, aspect politique, parce que c'est juste pour protéger cette population, pour quantifier les besoins et pour préparer le retour, soit à la mère patrie, soit à l'intégration sur place, soit aller à un pays tiers, s'il y a un pays tiers qui voudrait les accueillir. Mais de toutes les façons, vous avez remarqué que pour la 13e résolution consécutive, le Conseil de sécurité insiste sur l'enregistrement et insiste également pour qu'on veille à ce que l'assistance alimentaire humanitaire ne soit plus détournée par le Polisario, les responsables du Croissant Rouge algérien. S'il vous plaît.
La résolution qu'on vient d'adopter le Conseil de sécurité se félicite des consultations informelles que M. de Mistura a eues en mars dernier. Que pensez-vous de ce nouveau cadre de concertation?
Je ne sais pas pourquoi vous l'appelez nouveau cadre de consultation. Le seul cadre qu'il y a, c'est les tables rondes. Et les tables rondes sont ancrées dans les résolutions du Conseil de sécurité, dans la dernière qui vient d'être adoptée. Il appelle à la reprise des tables rondes, il appelle au retour des 4 participants. Donc les consultations ne pourront jamais remplacer les tables rondes. Il n'y aura pas de substitution. Et le Maroc se posera à ce que ces consultations bilatérales, informelles, puissent remplacer un jour les tables rondes. D'ailleurs, rien que dans la sémantique, cherchez au dictionnaire que veut dire consultation, que veut dire informel. Consultation, c'est échange de points de vue, exprimer son avis, parfois bavardage, simple discussion. C'est ça les consultations, mais sans prise de position. Informel, ça veut dire que ce n'est pas officiel. Donc, on ne peut pas remplacer les tables rondes par des discussions indéfinies. Nous avons effectivement participé au mois de mars, comme cela figure dans le rapport de l'envoyé personnel, le secrétaire général, à des consultations afin d'écouter l'envoyé personnel et échanger avec lui. Mais si vous lisez le rapport du secrétaire général, vous allez trouver dans le paragraphe 39. Par hasard, le seul qui se félicite de ces consultations bilatérales, c'est le ministre des Affaires étrangères algérien. Il dit qu'ils sont très utiles. Ils ne vont pas revenir à table de négociation, de table ronde, parce qu'ils se limitent uniquement à ces consultations bilatérales. Nous leur disons, nous ne pouvons pas accepter qu'il y ait les tables rondes, qu'il y ait les consultations bilatérales informelles, parce qu'une partie, l'Algérie, a décidé de changer par elle-même le format. Donc, nous pouvons accepter toute discussion avec l'envoyé personnel, mais la discussion, ou si l'envoyé personnel voudrait l'appeler consultation, ça serait pour mener, ça serait vers la voie pour les tables rondes. Il faut que ces discussions ou consultations informelles soient organiquement liées à, in fine, arriver à l'organisation des tables rondes, comme cela a été fait par l'envoyé personnel. Il a eu des réunions bilatérales avec les ministres des Affaires étrangères des partis en Europe à 2 reprises pour préparer les tables rondes. Nous attendons à ce que ce soit également le cas, en dehors du maintien, de la réaffirmation des tables rondes. Nous ne pourrons jamais cautionner à ce qu'il y ait uniquement des consultations bilatérales informelles au niveau des représentants permanents sans objectif bien déterminé. Et l'objectif pour nous, c'est les tables rondes et c'est la base référentielle, c'est les résolutions du Conseil de sécurité. C'est ça notre référentiel. S'il vous plaît.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, bonjour. C'est Abdel Mohamed, deuxième chaîne marocaine. L'envoyé spécial fait rendu visite dernièrement au Sahara. Pour vous, quelle évaluation pour mettre vous pour cette visite?
Très positif. Tout d'abord, il faut souligner que M. Sylie s'est rendu au Sahara à l'invitation express du Royaume du Maroc. Ça d'un côté. Il a passé 4 jours dans des entretiens très fructueux. Il a eu des entretiens avec les autorités locales, avec les présidents des régions, avec les chouurs, avec les élus locaux. Il a rencontré la société civile, plusieurs ONG, les femmes, parce qu'il a insisté à rencontrer les femmes. Il a rencontré les femmes parlementaires, élues, mais également femmes d'affaires. Il a rencontré une délégation des ONG de jeunes. Il a rencontré les ONG en charge des droits de l'homme. Il a rencontré la commission régionale de Conseil national des droits de l'homme à Laayoune et Dakhla. Mais il a rencontré également l'ONG qui réunit les ralliés du Polisario qui vivent en toute tranquillité, en liberté et qui jouissent de tous leurs droits au Sahara marocain. Il a également, dans un dîner officiel, rencontré les consuls des consulats ouverts à Dakhla, avec qui il s'est entretenu durant le dîner sur les opportunités d'affaires, pourquoi ils ont ouvert, et ils lui ont expliqué le pourquoi et le comment de l'ouverture de leur consulat sur place et surtout l'activité qu'ils mènent, aussi bien en ce qui concerne la migration que les investissements, que les opportunités d'affaires. Il a également, ça c'est les rencontres, mais en même temps, il a fait des visites sur le terrain, aussi bien à Laayoune qu'à Dakhla, l'hôpital d'oncologie qui vient d'ouvrir depuis 1 an. Il a visité l'hôpital universitaire qui est encore en chantier, mais qui sera prêt dans 1 an, qui est une immense infrastructure pour l'ensemble de la région. Il a visité le centre d'excellence et de travail. Là également, c'est un centre gigantesque où on lui a expliqué les chances qui sont offertes aux jeunes pour la formation. Il a visité le grand port d'Arla en construction, qui sera l'un des plus grands ports en eau profonde de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et comme il a vu également des présentations sur l'autoroute d'Arfaya-Dakhla de 1000 km. Et je vous réfère à ce qu'il a dit dans son rapport, qu'il a été impressionné, impressive, les infrastructures. Donc cette visite a été très utile. Il a également rencontré les responsables de la MINURSO, s'est entretenu avec les observateurs. Il a rencontré toutes les personnes qu'il a souhaité voir et les personnes qui ont souhaité le voir également. Nous n'avons mis aucune limite à ces rencontres sur place et nous sommes très contents que le rapport qu'il a fait sur cette visite a été factuel, a été positif et surtout il a permis aux membres du Conseil de sécurité de se rendre compte de ce qui est la réalité de la vie paisible au Sahara, les investissements, les libertés, les activités économiques. Et surtout, il y avait un message, et là je m'arrêterai là, pratiquement tous ces interlocuteurs ont insisté sur une chose, l'espoir. Et ils se projettent sur l'avenir, sur la construction du Sahara, ce qu'ils sont en train de faire, et également la possibilité pour leurs frères et sœurs et parents qui sont dans les camps de Tindouf pour qu'ils reviennent, pour qu'ils participent avec eux à la construction, à l'édification de cette grande région du Maroc. À aucun moment, ils ne se sont attardés sur le passé ou sur ce qu'ils ont vécu. Même ceux qui ont fui les camps de Tindouf, ils ont eu des messages et surtout un langage positif, prometteur. Et se sont, comme j'ai dit, projetés à l'avenir afin qu'ils comprennent que c'est une génération qui pense à la vie ensemble. Et c'est une génération qui pense à la paix, la sécurité et surtout la coexistence avec tout le monde. Même ceux qui ont une opinion différente, il y a de la place pour tout le monde. Merci.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, merci de ce point de presse habituel, utile. La résolution stipule que le différend sur le Sahara dépend de la consolidation de la coopération entre les membres du Maghreb, les membres de l'UMA. Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI a envoyé un message en Algérie il y a quelque temps voulant inaugurer un dialogue. L'Algérie a rejeté ce dialogue. Le Polisario a déclaré la guerre totale. Comment pensez-vous que les Nations Unies puissent faire quoi que ce soit pour consolider la coopération entre les États membres de l'UMA?
La résolution, je vous remercie pour votre question. La résolution que le Conseil de sécurité vient d'adopter verse dans ce que vous venez de dire. Il parle de la coopération entre les pays de la région. Il parle du règlement pacifique de ce différend. Il parle du rôle de l'Algérie. Donc ce problème sera réglé avec l'apport, la contribution, la sagesse de l'Algérie autour de la table ronde, Inch'Allah. Sa Majesté le Roi, que Dieu l'assiste, a toujours maintenu la main tendue envers les frères algériens, envers son frère, son Excellence le Président Taboun. Donc cette main tendue, elle est toujours là parce qu'elle est motivée par une conviction, une foi sincère dans la nécessité de vivre ensemble, de la paix ensemble, de la construction du Grand Maghreb ensemble et surtout dans la nécessité d'offrir un avenir meilleur aux générations présentes et futures. Notre génération, malheureusement, n'a pas vu ce rêve se réaliser et le rêve de Sa Majesté le Roi, c'est que avec son frère, le président algérien, cela puisse se réaliser dans le meilleur délai possible. Les Marocains sont résilients, mais en même temps optimistes, mais en même temps têtus quand il s'agit de la marocanité du Sahara et déterminés. La marocanité du Sahara ne peut pas être ni sacrifiée, ni négociée, ni discutée avec qui que ce soit. On peut parler de tout, sauf la marocanité. Et surtout, n'oubliez pas, chaque Marocain a fait le serment de tout faire pour préserver c'est la marocanité du Sahara et pour défendre notre pays. Tout le reste est négociable. Je vous remercie. Dernière question. Ouais.
L'Algérie va siéger au Conseil de sécurité dans 2 mois. À quoi vous vous attendez?
À quoi je m'attends? J'aimerais m'attendre à de bonnes choses. Enfin, il y a 2 scénarios. Lorsque l'Algérie accédera à partir du 1er janvier au Conseil de sécurité en tant que membre non permanent. Soit l'Algérie assume pleinement sa responsabilité en tant que membre responsable, en tant que membre représentant le groupe arabe au sein du Conseil de sécurité, en tant que membre qui est susceptible d'apporter sa contribution à la préservation de la paix et la sécurité dans le monde. Il y a énormément de problèmes en Afrique, il y a au Moyen-Orient, il y a en Asie, il y a le Conseil de sécurité et l'Algérie peut apporter sa touche, sa contribution à la consolidation de la paix et la sécurité dans le monde. Et ça, c'est le scénario que je dirais heureux, que nous espérons vivement. Il y a l'autre scénario, c'est que l'Algérie se désintéresse de tout cela et se concentre, se focalise sur la question du Sahara marocain ou à son obsession marocaine ou saharienne. Ce serait un gâchis, là également, parce qu'il n'a pas été élu dans le cadre d'une rotation pour s'occuper uniquement de son agenda national. Le Conseil de sécurité, il a ses règles. Il a son mandat. C'est l'organe le plus important des Nations Unies. Il a ses objectifs. Son mandat est géré par la charte, mais par également le règlement provisoire du Conseil. Ils sont clairs. L'Algérie ne peut pas faire autrement que s'inscrire dans ce que le Conseil de sécurité a déjà fait. Le dossier du Sahara, il aura déjà des dizaines de résolutions. Il ne peut pas venir et commencer de scratch ou de vacuum. Il y a la dernière résolution, c'est la 2703. Il doit travailler là-dessus. S'il travaille là-dessus, je crois que tout membre du Conseil de sécurité se doit, s'il est sincère, de s'inscrire dans la légitimité onusienne, dans la légitimité du Conseil de sécurité et mettre en œuvre ce que cet organe dans lequel il est devenu membre, non permanent, doit mettre en œuvre cela. S'il ne le met pas en œuvre, ou s'il persiste, comme j'ai dit, ben ça serait autre chose. Dans ce cas-là, le Maroc sera là. Nous serons vigilants. Nous nous opposerons à toute instrumentalisation du Conseil et nous répondrons à toute provocation, que ce soit à l'intérieur du Conseil ou bien ici, à partir de cette tribune. Le Maroc est connu pour être parmi, et ça c'est pas moi qui le dis, parmi les 193 pays membres des Nations Unies, à être le plus présent au Conseil de sécurité. Notre assiduité aux réunions du Conseil de sécurité est un exemple. Nous sommes parmi les 10 premiers pays. Nous allons encore faire plus avec l'Algérie en tant que membre. Tout simplement, pas pour créer quoi que ce soit. Le Maroc n'a jamais été celui qui provoque ou celui qui crée le problème. Nous sommes le pays qui réagit. Si nous tendons la main à nos frères algériens, la délégation aussi, pour travailler ensemble, nous interviendrons positivement lorsqu'ils présideront le Conseil, lorsqu'ils auront leur événement signature ou leur thématique qu'ils choisiront pour le mois de leur présidence. Nous serons animés avec l'esprit le plus positif, le plus fraternel et le plus responsable. Parce que nous voyons loin et nous ne mêlons pas la question du Sahara à autre chose. Il y a 2 réunions du Conseil par an. C'est au mois d'octobre pour prorogation du mandat et le mois d'avril pour le mi-parcours ou le mi-terme. Ben, en dehors de ces deux réunions, ben, il n'y a pas de raison de soulever la question du Sahara à n'importe quel discours. Sentiment que nous sommes là, eh bien, il y a un problème entre nous, on le laisse de côté, sauf s'il est inscrit à l'ordre du jour, et on travaille ensemble. Nous leur tendons la main ici pour travailler ensemble pour la réussite de leur mission, parce que ce n'est pas dans leur intérêt que chaque fois que s'ils soulèvent la question ou il n'est pas inscrit à l'ordre du jour, le Maroc sera obligé de répondre. Ce n'est pas dans leur intérêt ni dans leur image, pour préserver leur image. Ils doivent maintenant envoyer l'image d'un pays responsable. C'est pour ça qu'ils sont ici dans le Conseil. Voilà, merci beaucoup, mesdames et messieurs. À l'année prochaine, Inch'Allah, je l'espère. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to speak in French first, and after you can rise and put your questions in any language you want. Le Royaume du Maroc se félicite de l'adoption de la résolution 700-03 du Conseil de sécurité sur la question du Sahara marocain. À cette occasion, je voudrais remercier vivement le pen holder américain pour la rédaction et la négociation de cette résolution. Nos remerciements s'adressent également aux autres membres du Conseil pour leur apport constructif et leur vote en faveur de cette résolution, qui représente un jalon additionnel dans le socle onusien pour le règlement définitif de ce différend régional entre deux pays voisins, le Maroc et l'Algérie. La nouvelle résolution du Conseil de sécurité consacre la sagesse et la clairvoyance du sécurité en tant que garant de la réponse à ce problème résiduel de la guerre froide. En ce faisant, le Conseil de sécurité le droit et la légalité internationale, mais également sur le réalisme, le pragmatisme, conforte également la vision et le choix stratégique de Sa Majesté le Roi en faveur de la négociation, le règlement pacifique des différends, la politique de la main tendue, et ce, conformément à l'article 6 de la Charte des Nations Unies et des résolutions pertinentes du Conseil de sécurité. La nouvelle résolution du Conseil de sécurité consacre les, je dirais, socles, les 7 fondamentaux pour la résolution de ce problème. 1. La résolution réaffirme la prééminence, la préséance de l'initiative marocaine d'autonomie en tant que seule et unique solution sérieuse et crédible pour régler ce problème. En ce faisant, là également, le Conseil a rejoint non seulement le Maroc, mais également une centaine de pays à travers le monde qui soutiennent cette initiative dans le plein respect de la souveraineté nationale et de l'intégrité territoriale. 2. Le Conseil réaffirme les paramètres de la solution qui doit être politique, réaliste, pragmatique, durable et basée sur le compromis. Non déplaise à l'Algérie et à son proxy, le Polisario, cette résolution signe le 28e acte de décès de référendum. L'Europe est définitivement impondérée depuis 2 décennies. 3. La résolution réaffirme également la responsabilité première de l'Algérie en tant que partie prenante principale à ce différend, en la nommant à 5 reprises au bord de la résolution et en lui demandant de présenter et de développer sa position afin de faire progresser
vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/802 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 13 votes in favor, no votes against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2703/2023. Anyone speaking? Who's speaking? And I'll give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. And I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States is pleased to see the Council reaffirm its support for Personal Envoy de Mistura and for MONUSCO, led by SRSG Ivanko, with the adoption of this resolution. Today, this Council sent a clear message that we must intensify efforts to advance an enduring and dignified resolution for Western Sahara without further delay. Although this resolution received widespread support, we regret that this Council was not unanimous in renewing this mandate, as unity greatly enhances UN efforts to achieve peace. Colleagues, the United States strongly supports Personal Envoy de Mistura and his efforts to advance the political process. In adopting this resolution, members of the Council underscored the urgent need for a successful political process. We again call on all parties to engage with the Personal Envoy in good faith and to work toward a sustainable political solution. A political solution is critical to promoting a peaceful and prosperous future for the people of Western Sahara and the region, and the United States continues to view Morocco's autonomy plan as serious, credible, realistic, and one potential approach to satisfying these aspirations. By renewing this mandate, this Council has also affirmed the critical role of MONUSCO, which works to de-escalate tensions, monitor and report on the situation on the ground, and foster the conditions for the political process to advance. We welcome the progress made by MONUSCO in the resupply of its team sites to sustain these crucial operations. The continuation of safe and regular resupply operations and continued respect for MONUSCO's freedom of movement are vital. Colleagues, we remain deeply concerned by the humanitarian conditions in Tindouf. The poor living standards, threats to food security, and lack of access to basic services require a collective response. The United States, as the largest donor to this humanitarian response, is committed to doing our part, but we must all step up. People across Western Sahara and the region are counting on us. Today was a positive step, but we must continue to push progress forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique thanks the PNUD for their efforts. We wish to express our strong support for the work of the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Mr. Stefan Mistura. In the same vein, we reiterate our support for the work of the United Nations Mission for Referendum in West Sahara, MINURSO. Mr. President, Mozambique has approached the consultation process leading to the drafting of this resolution in an open and constructive manner, fully conscious and aware of the mandate of MINURSO as adopted by this Council. We therefore express our readiness to engage in negotiating process in good faith with the legitimate purpose of assisting MINURSO to return to its core objectives of implementing a referendum for self-autodetermination of the people of Western Sahara as provided by Resolution 690/1991 and subsequent decisions by this very chamber. It is our conviction that the resolution just adopted, it is a current form, will not assist the parties in achieving a just, lasting, and mutually accepted political solution as originally intended. To the contrary, it halts a gradual shift away from the mandate. It only postpones addressing core issues that need to be dealt with. We support all efforts aimed at just, lasting, and mutually acceptable political solutions that will provide for the self-determinations of people of Western Sahara in accordance with Security Council resolutions 69, 1754, 2414, 2468, 2494, 2548, 2602, and 2654. Our position is anchored in the Charter of the United Nations, which holds that all peoples shall have should have unquestionable and inalienable right to self-determination. This principle was further espoused by General Assembly Resolution 1514 of 1960. As a country that was born from the hard exercising of its very right for ourselves, we hold this to be not only moral right, but also a right policy with a strong legal basis. We reaffirm our commitment to making every effort to help the parties to find a just, lasting, and mutually acceptable political solution based on compromise. But this has to be based on genuine efforts and with respect to every member constructive proposal. We reiterate our call to the parties to engage in a good faith with the Secretary General's personal envoy to achieve the long delay exercise of its right to self-determination by the people of Western Sahara. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Russian Federation abstained on the draft resolution of the Security Council prepared by the USA extending the mandate of the UN mission for the referendum in Western Sahara, because not a single one of our principled and properly substantiated comments, including those of a compromise nature, which we have expressed to the American authors of several years now, were taken into account. None of them were taken into account. For that reason, the resolution presented today does not reflect the real situation on the ground that has taken shape in the Western Sahara settlement process and will hardly do anything to support the efforts of the personal envoy of the Secretary-General, Staffan de Mistura, to resume direct negotiating process between Morocco and the Polisario Front in order to achieve a mutually acceptable solution. Mr. President, Since 2018, resolutions extending MINURSO's mandate have been amended in ways that, as we see it, do harm to the impartial and unbiased approach to the problem of Western Sahara. There is vague wording emerging, which raises questions. Wording that determines the direct parties to the conflict and the Western Sahara settlement process. The many references to the no longer relevant round table format are inappropriate as we see it. This format limits the mediating work of the personal envoy. We did not agree with this approach in the past, and we cannot support it today. Therefore, we would once again like to confirm our consistent position on the Western Sahara settlement process. We are in favor of a balanced and unbiased stance. We support the efforts of the personal envoy to organize direct negotiations between Morocco and the Polisario Front. In that way, including as a permanent member of the Security Council and a member of the Group of Friends of Western Sahara, we continue our active contacts with all those interested parties. We are working with the Moroccans, the Polisario, the Algerians, and the Mauritanians. We call on all parties to refrain from unilateral actions which could complicate a resumption of a focused political dialogue. The ultimate formula for a settlement must be based on mutually acceptable solutions which would facilitate a just political settlement of the situation surrounding Western Sahara that suits Morocco, which stipulates self-determination for the people of Western Sahara within procedures that correspond to the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. In conclusion, we would like to underscore that our position today reflects exclusively our assessment of the unscrupulous work of the pen holders on the draft that was presented today. Once again, our very serious doubts over the impartial action by the pen holders of the country subject to the Security Council, the fulfilling of those obligations, our serious doubts are being borne out. At the same time, we consistently support the UN mission in Western Sahara, which plays a key stabilizing role to create conducive conditions on the ground for the resumption of dialogue between Morocco and the Polisario Front, and for advancing the peace process, and also the head of the mission, Alexander Ivanko. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, over the years, MINURSO has diligently fulfilled its Council mandate and made positive contributions to maintaining stability in Western Sahara and promoting a political settlement. The resolution just adopted shows the Council's determination to support the mission in the performance of its duties and to resolve politically the question of Western Sahara. China is pleased to see the positive progress made on MINURSO's logistical support and hopes that relevant parties will continue to strengthen communication and cooperation with the mission in accordance with Council resolutions to enable the mission to deliver on its mandate. China's position on the question of Western Sahara is consistent and clear. China supports a just and a lasting solution acceptable to all parties reached through consultations among parties as equals on the basis of the relevant Council resolutions. China supports the personal envoy of SG in continuing to step up mediation efforts to further progress in the political process on the basis of an in-depth understanding of the concerns of the parties. It is China's hope that future Council discussions on the resolutions on MINURSO mandate can reflect the latest changes of the situation. We also hope that the pen holder can facilitate full consultation of the Council to garner broader consensus. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President, France welcomes the adoption of the resolution which renews the mandate of MINURSO for 1 year. First and foremost, I wish to reiterate France's full support for the efforts of the personal envoy of the Secretary-General. His recent visit to the region and the consultations that he led were a positive development. I also hail the work of MINURSO that plays a key role in stabilizing the region and contributes to creating the conditions necessary for a resumption of the political process. We also welcome the resumption of resupply operations of MINURSO monitoring sites to the east of the Berm in September. A lasting resumption, however, remains necessary in order to guarantee regular resupply. It's also essential to guarantee the freedom of movement of MINURSO. France recalls its concern regarding ceasefire violations. We call for those responsible for these violations to fully implement the ceasefire agreement in order to facilitate the continuation of the political process. Mr. President, France defends a just, lasting, and mutually acceptable political solution in accordance with Security Council resolutions. I recall the historic, clear and constant support of France for the Moroccan autonomy plan. That plan has been on the table since 2007. It is now time to move forward with it. In this vein, France encourages all parties to commit to finding a practicable, realistic, enduring solution based on compromise. We support the efforts of the personal envoy in order to ensure a resumption of the round tables. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. We voted in favour of the one-year renewal of the MINURSO mandate. This vote expresses my country's support for the political process, aiming to achieve a political solution which is practicable and realistic, feasible and lasting based on compromise, a solution that is to the situation in the Western Sahara. As we indicated during negotiations, this is a balanced resolution which takes account of the expectations of all parties. It will make it possible to support the efforts of the personal envoy, Staffan de Mistura, in order to allow the resumption of the political process between the various parties. This diplomatic momentum ushered in by the personal envoy must be built upon, because the resumption of the roundtable process with all key players is important. We also support the Moroccan autonomy plan, which presents credible horizons, reassuring perspectives, which will make it possible not only to put an end to the current state of gridlock, but also to reach a political solution which is just, lasting and mutually acceptable. Finally, we encourage the Kingdom of Morocco to continue its efforts in order to preserve the ceasefire and to strengthen its cooperation with MINURSO. We call upon all other parties to do the same thing in the interests of security and stability throughout the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, at the outset, we welcome the adoption of today's resolution that renews the mandate of MINURSO for an additional year. We thank the United States, the penholder, and the members of the Security Council for positively engaging during the consultation process. The UAE voted in favor of this resolution because it has a balanced, comprehensive text, and it takes into account the important developments that took place since last year, including the informal consultations that took place between the personal envoy, Mr. Staffan de Mistura. Today's resolution shows the support of the Council to MINURSO and the efforts of the Special Envoy in order to make progress in the political process that is facilitated by the UN. As this is the last meeting scheduled for this issue during our mandate at the Security Council, I would like to reaffirm the following 3 points. 1, we must continue to support the efforts of the Special Envoy in order to pave the way for a relaunch of negotiations. We believe that the roundtable format with the participation of all parties will help break the political impasse. We stress in this regard that the autonomy initiative provided by the Kingdom of Morocco, and that was described or mentioned by UN Security Council resolutions as serious and legitimate, this is the only way to reach a last, durable, and pragmatic political solution that is mutually acceptable. Second, enabling MINURSO to resupply its sites in a sustainable manner and not just on an exceptional basis. This is necessary to allow MINURSO to carry out its mandate in an effective manner. In this regard, we commend the cooperation between MINURSO and the Kingdom of Morocco and their support for the ceasefire. We believe that the Polisario Front should cooperate fully with MINURSO and should remove all obstacles that could impact the work of the mission and to commit to the ceasefire. In conclusion, we reaffirm our support to the Kingdom of Morocco and its sovereignty over the Moroccan Sahara. We look forward for the UN to continue its constructive efforts in order to reach a solution for this issue that lasted for decades, and this will help strengthen security and stability in the region, a region that is facing many challenges. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. The 9,461st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is identical letters dated 19th January 2016 from the Permanent Representative of Colombia to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, S/2016/53. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2023/701, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia. Members of the Council have before them document S/2023/808, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2023/808 please raise their hand? The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2704/2023. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to thank colleagues for the constructive engagement during negotiations. The United Kingdom welcomes this consensus adoption, which sends a strong signal of support for the peace process in Colombia. And as Women, Peace and Security High-Level Week draws to a close, it is fitting that this Council has recognised the efforts of the UN verification mission to incorporate gender as a cross-cutting issue in implementing its mandate and ensuring adequate gender expertise. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, the A3 welcomes the unanimous adoption of the resolution on the expansion of the mandate of the United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia, presented by the United Kingdom, to whom we thank for their dedicated effort in conducting the negotiations to reach a consensual text. The vote in favor of this resolution reiterates our commitment to supporting the government and the Colombian people towards building a stable and lasting peace. Guided by the trust that Colombia has placed in the United Nations to verify the implementation of the peace agreement in the country, and given the remarkable achievements registered so far in the negotiations with the National Liberation Army, ELN, we are committed to supporting the mission in its continued monitoring and verification of the ceasefire agreement between the government of Colombia and the Estado Mayor Central, contingent on the necessary conditions set forth by the Secretary General. We'll continue to monitor and encourage further advancement of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement, an important component of the agreement which will go far in re-establishing justice and equality for all Colombian people, including Afro-Colombians and indigenous people. In concluding, the A3 will continue to offer its unwavering support to the verification mission and the special representative as they diligently monitor and enforce compliance with the commitments of the Colombian peace agreement. Their exemplary performance in this role deserves acknowledgement and reinforces our commitment to their ongoing efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We are pleased the Council came together today to unanimously extend the mandate of the UN verification mission in Colombia for another 12 months. We are particularly delighted that a reference to the importance of including youth in the peace process was reflected. As the driving force of the future, the voices and the active participation of youth should be protected, respected, and promoted for the peace process to be sustainable. Protection for young community members and leaders is needed to ensure their full and effective participation in peace-building efforts. The need to provide protection of young community members and leaders to ensure their full and effective participation in peace-building efforts was also part of the advice from the Peace-Building Commission to the Security Council. And this practice will strengthen relations between the PBC and the Council, which Japan believes is important. We hope that such good practices will be enhanced. We also welcome the emphasis on the efforts of the UN verification mission to continue to integrate a gender perspective as a cross-cutting issue into its work, among other perspectives. To conclude, Japan reaffirms its firm support for the work of the UN verification mission and will remain committed to supporting the peace process and the peace-building efforts in Colombia. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Brazil. I'll speak in Spanish.
Distinguished colleagues, Brazil congratulates the members of the Security Council on the unanimous adoption of the mandate renewal for the United Nations verification mission in Colombia. Brazil thanks the United Kingdom for its sterling work as penholder. The work of the Security Council in Colombia is in line with and must always be in line with the needs and priorities of Colombia as expressed by its government. In this connection, we are delighted to note that the resolution adopted today will of that country. Brazil supports the strategy of the Petro government to achieve a total peace. We recognize the importance of and the need for the additional dialogues that are underway to spread the dividends of peace throughout the country in its entirety. We continue to follow with interest and optimism the dialogue of the government with the self-proclaimed group Estado Mayor Central, EMC. As in the case with the ELN, we hope that the Council will be able to authorize the mission to verify the implementation of the ceasefire agreement with the EMC when the necessary degree of maturity has been reached on this front. It is important to optimize the contribution that the Council makes to progress across the various negotiation processes underway in Colombia, with the ultimate goal of encouraging ceasefires both with the government and between the groups that continue to be engaged in territorial disputes. The peace process in Colombia is an example for the world of how to prioritize and incorporate the perspective of women, peace and security into work. The verification mission in Colombia must also reflect that reality, guaranteeing the integration of a gender perspective in each facet of the work underway to build and consolidate peace is vital to achieve broader and sustainable solutions. We're not adding work to a mandate, but what we're doing is strengthening the quality of our approach, the approach that we adopt for the peace processes, tackling issues crucial to peace in Colombia, from rural reform to the reincorporation of former combatants using a gender-sensitive approach, enriches our work and strengthens the foundations for a lasting peace in the country. Once again, we congratulate the people and government for Colombia on their tireless efforts to seek, achieve, and consolidate total peace across its territory. Peace is the only path possible to guarantee the prosperity and the peaceful civic coexistence of all Colombia's people. The renewal of the verification mission's mandate by the Security Council is an invaluable contribution to the lasting success of this vital but crucial journey that Colombia has embarked upon. I thank you.
I resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
The 162nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel and Jordan to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in this meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invited the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Filippo Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of the United Nations Children's Fund, and Ms. Lisa Dothan, Director of the Humanitarian Financing and Resourcing Mobilization Division of the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It's so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Filippo Lazzarini.
Mr. President, member of the Council, the last 3 weeks have been horrific. Almost everyone in Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory, and the broader region is in mourning. The horrific attacks by Hamas in Israel on October 7 were shocking. The relentless bombardment by the Israeli forces of the Gaza Strip are shocking. The level of destruction is unprecedented. The human tragedy unfolding under our watch is unbearable. 1 million people, half the population of Gaza, were pushed from the north of the Gaza Strip toward the south in 3 weeks. The south, however, has not been spared from bombardment, with significant number killed. I have said many times, and I will say it again, no place is safe in Gaza. Now, civilians remaining in the north are receiving evacuation notices from the Israeli forces, urging them south to receive scarce humanitarian assistance. But many, including pregnant women, people with disabilities, the sick and the wounded, are unable to move. What happened and continues to happen is forced displacement. Over 670,000 displaced people are now in overcrowded UNRWA schools and buildings. They live in appalling, unsanitary conditions with limited food and water, sleeping on the floor without mattresses, up to the number of children killed annually across the world's conflict zones since 2019. This cannot be collateral damage. Churches, mosques, hospitals, and UNRWA facilities, including those sheltering displaced people, have not been spared. Too many people have been killed and injured while seeking safety in places protected by international humanitarian law. The current siege imposed on Gaza is collective punishment. 2 weeks of full siege followed by the trickle of aid last week mean that basic services are crumbling, medicine is running out, food and water are running out, fuel is running out. The streets of Gaza have started overflowing with sewage, which will cause a massive health hazard very soon. In the latest blow, the communication blackout over the weekend has aggravated the panic and distress of people. The blackout meant that people could not communicate with their loved ones inside Gaza to know who is dead or who is alive. They no longer knew whether they would receive bread from UNRWA. They felt abandoned and cut off from the rest of the world. The communication blackout has accelerated the breaking down of civil order. Panic pushed thousands of desperate people to head to the UNRWA warehouses and distribution center, where we store the food and other supply we started receiving via Egypt last week. A further breakdown in civil order will make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the largest UN agency in Gaza to continue operating. It will also make it impossible to bring in convoys. I say this while being fully aware that UNRWA is the last remaining lifeline for the Palestinian people in Gaza. Member of the Council, UNRWA is calling on you for support. I lost 64 colleagues in just over 3 weeks. The last tragic passing confirmed was 2 hours ago. Samir, head of security and safety in the Middle region, was killed with his wife and 8 children. This is the highest number of UN aid worker killed in a conflict in such a short time. My 13,000 colleagues in Gaza are from a community of 1.7 million Palestinian refugees out of 2.2 million residents in the Gaza Strip. Those who are alive have, for the most part, lost relatives, friends, neighbors, and are displaced like the majority of Gazans. Many of my own colleagues now live, sleep, and work in UNRWA shelters. And yet, they are showing exceptional dedication to UN value. No one can do justice to thousands of UNRWA staff who continue to work tirelessly to support their communities. These are teachers, doctors, social workers, engineers, and support staff. They are mother and father. If they were not in Gaza, they could have been your neighbor, your friends. And they are operating 150 UNRWA shelters. They are keeping 1/3 of our health center open and run 80 mobile health teams. They support the entry of humanitarian convoys and the storage and distribution of aid. They distribute the little fuel we have left to hospitals, bakeries, and shelters. My UNRWA colleagues are the only glimmer of hope for the entire Gaza Strip, a ray of light as humanity sinks into its darkest hour. But they are running out of fuel, out of water, out of food and medicine, and will soon be unable to operate. Let me be clear, the handful of convoys being allowed through Rafah is nothing compared to the needs of over 2 million people trapped in Gaza. The system in place to allow aid into Gaza is geared to fail unless there is political will to make the flow of supplies meaningful, matching the unprecedented humanitarian needs. Mr. President, Gaza has over 2 million people, half of them children. Gazans are vibrant, educated people who aspire to have normal lives, families, children, education, and dreams of a better future. Today, Gazans feel that they are not treated as other civilians. Most of them feel trapped in a war they have nothing to do with. They feel the world is equating all of them to Hamas. This is dangerous, and we know this too well from previous conflicts and crises. An entire population is being dehumanized. The atrocities of Hamas do not absolve the state of Israel from its obligation under international humanitarian law. Every war has rules, and this one is no exception. Hannah Arendt said, "The death of human empathy is one of the first and most revealing signs of a culture that is about to fall into barbarity. More than ever, Gazans deserve our empathy. Its absence will deepen the polarization in the region and further push away any prospect of peace." Mr. President, while a lot of the focus is on Gaza, I wish to reiterate that another crisis is unfolding in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The United Nations has been sounding the alarm for months on the increased violence. Palestinian fatalities this year are the highest since the UN started to keep record in 2005. At least 115 Palestinians have been killed since October 7, including 33 children. The movement restrictions imposed across the West Bank are impacting our services, including schools and health centers. Meanwhile, the situation on the Israeli-Lebanese border is getting worse, with regular exchanges of fires and civilian casualties reported. In conclusion, I'm very worried about the potential spillover of this conflict beyond Gaza unless the following is enforced. First, there must be strict adherence to international humanitarian law. This means civilian and civilian infrastructure, including UN premises, school, hospital, places of worship, and shelter hosting civilian, must be protected all over the Gaza Strip, north and south, and at all times. This is not an option, it is an obligation. Second, we need a safe, unimpeded, substantial, and continuous flow of humanitarian aid, including fuel, into the Gaza Strip and across it. For this, we need an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Third, UNRWA still needs funds. We have the necessary and largest presence on the ground. We can deliver if we have the means and the resources, including the finances to pay staff on the front lines. UNRWA has received generous contribution towards its initial flash appeal, but without a fully funded core budget, we cannot pay salaries and deliver. Finally, in these dark times, we must not lose sight of our humanity. Our empathy should apply to all, Palestinian, Israeli,